So let me just get a show of hands. Remaining in the room, how many people are more from the agency side and commercial side versus the people who are approaching this conference from the academic perspective? How many people do we have here from the commercial side? And how many from the academic side? Okay, so the commercial side tends to stay a little bit later, it looks like.
We get paid to. $500 an hour.
Oh, wow. I should renegotiate my contract. So anyway, a lot of this is going to be stuff that we've already covered. I'm borrowing from Mary Meeker's most recent study on trends, where she talks about mobile traffic having grown a tremendous amount from '08 to now. She estimates that it will be at 25% next year. We're seeing with a lot of our clients that it's way above those levels. You know, some of my retail clients are seeing traffic of about 30% to 40%, some 50%. We're seeing that only about 1.5 billion out of 5 billion are on smartphones. There's huge opportunity for growth there. We're going to see a lot more engagement with mobile, especially for retailers, as more people adopt smartphones. The typical user checks their phone about 150 times a day. We've seen that kind of statistic or that kind of finding in many forms over the course of the day today. Hopefully nobody here's checked it quite that much, so we have a lot of checking to do when we get home. But this also means, obviously, that a lot of people check their phone way more than 150 times a day. And then 45% of Groupon's earnings came from mobile devices. It just kind of shows that there's a way to monetize the mobile device. Maxymiser, the company that I'm with, is focused on helping brands use their mobile and digital channels in general more effectively. That could mean increased conversion. That could mean any other action of interest. And we work with brands to help them do that. So today we heard a lot about studies, findings, et cetera, on how to use mobile more effectively, et cetera. The question I have now is, now what? How do we use this information and monetize it ultimately? What's the vehicle we can use to do that? We released in August a study that looked at trends in mobile as they pertain to retail specifically. And I'm going to go over a couple of those findings and talk about kind of actionable opportunities that kind of are the result or go hand in hand with some of those findings. So the first is, what's the single most important factor when you visit a retailer's mobile site? We see by a landslide, easy-to-use experience is going to be the primary thing that drives kind of a user's experience in general on a mobile site. But user experience is very, very vague. It's broad. It's a term that we use often. And what is an easy experience? So I'm going to do something a little bit more interactive now. If we were to test all of these experiences against each other on a mobile site and ask you, which do you think, when measured against a default, is going to drive the highest increase in revenues? Let's get a show of hands for who thinks A is going to drive the most increase in revenues. The only difference here, or the two differences, are the size of the button and the color of the button. Those are the elements that we're looking to measure. So who would say that A is going to drive the largest increase against the control? One person. Okay, who would say B is going to drive the largest increase? A couple. Who would say C is going to drive the largest increase? Okay. And D, who says D would, okay. All right, great. So the answers are actually as follows. This is kind of the most basic test you could possibly run. It's a very, very simple ABN test. And it shows that our intuition is not always correct, okay? We all want to drive an easy-to-use experience because we know that's the most important thing. But at the end of the day, the experience that one person here...
I do user testing.
Yes. So you get it to some extent. So we see that that's the winner, and the experience that most of us voted for, and I would have probably voted for this if I did not do a lot of testing, is actually the loser in this particular case. It probably decreased lift at the end of the day. So that's really interesting, and it just stresses the importance of, we have these studies, testing them regularly, have that ongoing culture of testing and using empirical data to drive our activities on the website. The next finding is that we see that people use the mobile device in very, very different ways and at very, very different times. We've talked about this a lot over the course of the day, right? A lot of the context of how you're using a certain kind of device, where you're using it, is going to play into what you want to experience when you are using that device. Furthermore, some of these high-level findings that we've identified through really interesting studies, research studies, are going to be more applicable to some and obviously a little bit less applicable to others. So the next thing I'd suggest is you should be using geo and temporal attributes to target customers. In other words, if you know they're standing in a store, you might send them an experience if they visit your app or website that gives them a discount on an in-store purchase. If you know they're walking somewhere near your store, you might want to give them the opportunity to find a store, or you might have some sort of default as I show here. The question is, though, which of these are going to be the most effective for your specific brand? Do all of these work equally? Do all of these work across the board? On a crowded subway, for example, which I thought was fascinating, is my brand really going to benefit as much as another brand, and is that really an effective way for me to target? So by doing this, you can also measure in real time what the increase in effectiveness, quote unquote, of your website is. And I use the word effectiveness purposely because for some it's going to be conversion. For others, as we heard with Mercedes, it's going to be driving visitors to a dealership. And for other brands, it's going to be a whole slew of other things. How many minutes a day do you spend on your mobile? So most people spend 60 to 120. They're visiting about 100. They're reaching for their mobile device about 150 times a day. Again, a lot of different ways of measuring how engaged people are with their mobile devices. The key thing here is that people are using their mobile devices a lot. They're also using them in different ways, leading up to a purchase. Some are using it a week before, some are using it on the way to the store, some are using it while in the store. So they're using it a lot, they're using it in different ways as it relates to retail and ultimately purchasing. What does that mean? It means that we are engaging with prospective customers, with existing customers frequently. All of that engagement gives us the opportunity to identify certain things about that person and store that information. And it's been said already, but the combination of those attributes is imperative. Building this profile of what you know about somebody is imperative. It is going to be the backbone of how you engage with them in future visits. It's going to drive, knowing which model of Mercedes they look at on your website tells you something about that person. How frequently they visit tells you about that person. And ultimately, what our technology does, and some others may do this as well, we're able to identify, one, which of those individual attributes are predictive, meaning which people with those attributes behave differently than the rest of the people who visit your site. But in combination, how do different profiles respond to different experiences on the mobile site? So some might like certain product recommendations, whereas others like to see things in bullet form rather than paragraph form, etc. You can test this real time. You can empirically prove and dynamically refine the experience that each of these profiles views. The last thing is a couple of words on the way we do personalization. So ultimately, building these profiles is really cool if you're doing it through in kind of real-time user sessions. So that's the most obvious way to do it. But you can also add to those profiles through importing CRM data, through gleaning from Facebook and other social media to build a truly robust profile. Then we go through the exercise of real-time determining which of those characteristics are predictive and in what combination they matter. So what profiles respond to different experiences, different elements, etc., and quantifying that. And ultimately, when a visitor reaches the site and you've determined what profile they are prone to respond to, you're able to present them with that information. Now, if you think about this in terms of multivariate testing, where you're taking 5 different elements, for example, and you're really building experiences based on all of the different combinations of variance for each element. So an element might be the size of the button, another element might be the color of the button. So you could test 3 different sizes against 5 different colors and have 15 experiences, right? And different profiles will respond to each of those experiences differently, and you're real-time in a dynamic way able to present the experience that is going to be optimal for each visitor, and continuously, as things change, gather more and more data and continue to refine the experiences that each is seeing. Ultimately, and a lot of people have said this as well, the mobile platform is an incredibly important touch point. In retail specifically, however, we're starting to talk a lot about omnichannel. Omnichannel is the leveraging of all different touch points in conjunction with each other. And we also saw that reinforcing messages matters a lot. So being able to do this across platforms in an omnichannel way is another kind of layer of personalization. It's kind of the pinnacle of ultimately where we want to be. And it's not only about showing the exact same message to the exact same person across devices. It's about understanding how to build off of the prior message. It's about having shown them something that relates to brand awareness the first time they engage with your mobile device, and then when they hit your website, kind of driving them to a call to action, driving them through a promotion to visit one of your stores and buy, driving them to buy something on the website. So just in summary, test. Your intuition isn't always going to be right. Testing and continuously testing is going to afford you the opportunity to, on an ongoing basis, refine, improve, and optimize your mobile experience for each visitor. Leverage geographic-based information, real-time information to target visitors with the things that might matter and measure whether they do matter and refine your approach accordingly. And then use the robust profiles that you're able to create to continuously present visitors with optimal experiences, refine those experiences real time, and ultimately do that across channels so that a visitor who visits your website and buys, let's say a suit on the Macy's website, will then kind of be browsing Macy's on their mobile device while they're waiting for a bus or a subway and see ideas for ties that match that suit based on the specific attributes that they're interested in. So if they're the kind of buyer who likes to buy slim fit clothing, or if they're bohemian in terms of their lifestyle, present them the styles that actually matter, but do it and do it across channels. Thank you all very much.
Questions? Daniel? So I have, I guess a follow-up to what I'd asked before, and it's also about I'm curious to know who is doing this, right? So I've seen this, in South Korea and China. They're really into this. They're doing this more and more. Can you give us some examples in the U.S.? Who are the kind of brands or retailers or industries?
There's kind of this what we call maturity curve of how you do testing, which leads to targeting, which leads to personalization. And with regard to A/B testing, and in some cases multivariate testing, it's about who's not doing it, because almost every brand is doing it.
On mobile, I meant on mobile.
And then on mobile has been identified as a huge opportunity. So I don't know if I can't mention specific brands, but I work with a number of very large consumer products companies who do it. Most of the large retailers who you think of are doing some kind of testing on mobile. Far fewer are doing actual targeting, and even fewer than that are doing personalization. But I mean, generally speaking, you know, companies like Nordstrom do it well. Companies like LL Bean do it well. Companies like, you know, General Mills, Procter and Gamble do it well with their various brands. Okay.
Susan. Susan has a question. Right?
I can't help but think when you're talking about omni-channel and integrating all these databases across all platforms and devices, this word omni kind of also spurred in this word of ominous to me. Is there, because you mentioned NSA, Anindya, but is there any, do you anticipate there's going to be consumer backlash? And just want to have your views on this, the dark side of all this omni-channel.
Yeah. That's a really, really good question. In fact, around the time when when I was interviewing for Maxymiser, I was meeting with the founder, and he had just seen a BBC piece on how creepy, they described it as creepy, all of this could be. And it could be creepy. I mean, but you know, there are things that we've all experienced that have gone from, you know, being really, really esoteric, not really integrated into our lives, to becoming mainstream. And online dating is a great example. I mean, if you were to do a survey of who uses online dating 10 years ago, everybody might have, but nobody would have actually raised their hands. And today it's kind of a badge of honor. People are happy to say that they're on online dating websites. People get used to these things that they're not so comfortable with over time. Especially, and this is going to be propelled by the benefit of it, the utility of it. When we start using this kind of thing to reduce friction, and people are able to, you know, like be sitting in a taxi, and Google is interacting with their calendar and other things they know about them, and shooting them a message unsolicited saying, hey, you have to go pick up your daughter from the airport in 30 minutes, and there's a lot of traffic, you better get going. We're going to start to realize the utility of this, and it's going to be a lot less creepy, and it's going to be a lot more beneficial, perceived as beneficial. So, I mean, that's my take. You know, up for grabs. Anyone knows, but that's what I think about it.
I would just add, I'm totally with you on that. You know, privacy is an illusion. Let's get over it.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, the millennial generation is going to be a lot more comfortable with this kind of thing than, you know, older generations are. This kind of thing is a part of their everyday life. They like being watched. I mean, they go on Facebook and we take pictures of our food, and I mean, it'll become mainstream over time, I think. Was there another question?
Yeah, just in general, you showed a picture of the DNAs of how, you know, you target real-time experiences by segments and so on. How rigorous and how really data intensive is the real work behind it right now? A lot of it seems like it's business rules, just you know, checks and boxes and so on. Because I really have to see, I haven't come across something where I've been segmented in the right way and have been presented consistently good messages. So
that's a great question. So people refer to personalization, and it means different things to different people. So some people will call like product recommendations a form of personalization. And what those product recommendations are is a recommendation of what you might like based on what other people who viewed the product that you viewed also viewed, right? Everyone here uses LinkedIn, right? So for example, and we use it for different ways, but if you look at a profile of a colleague of yours, right? There will be this thing to the right that shows people who viewed this profile also viewed these profiles. And what do they show? Profiles of every one of that person's colleagues. So if I go to look at one of my former colleagues at Macy's when I was working in omnichannel, if I view their profile, I'll be able to view, or I'll be recommended all of the other people who work along those people who are still at Macy's. They're not doing it based on a dynamic set of characteristics that belong to you specifically. So if you like football, and we know that about you, and you shop in the evenings, and we know that about you, and you specifically like the Miami Dolphins, and we know that about you, when you go to an apparel retailer who sells, football jerseys, and we show you a Miami Dolphins jersey instead of a Chicago Bears jersey, that's relevant personalization because it's based on your specific characteristics and based on a set of them, a combination of them. And we know the combination improves the accuracy or the relevance of those things for you specifically. It's not based on what somebody completely independent of you looked at and then looked at subsequently. That person could be a very, very different person with very, very different interests. The only common thread is that you both looked at a certain thing online. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm curious, is the sophistication on that spectrum of trying to drive the personalization to be more relevant?
Yeah.
Is it moving forward at all? Is there investment in that area? Where are people struggling with?
So we happen to have been, our company was created about 8 years ago in London, and we moved to the US just about 3 or 4 years ago. We're probably the biggest in our space in terms of revenues, at least. I believe we have it right. If I were on the brand side and I was building a website, I'd want to be doing this and I'd want to be using this specific technology. But because I see that it works, meaning you're not going to publish academic research papers on the algorithms we use, right? But if you look at the lift in the metric of interest on your website when you do this versus not do it, it's significantly improving results. And I'd say far more than some of the others who do personalization based on these kinds of affinities, what this person looked at and then subsequently looked at, and making recommendations, et cetera, based on that.
Okay, so we are out of time. So thank you, Daniel, again for coming by.